You have likely never been tortured. Nobody has forced ideology into your head. Yet, the greatest threat to your autonomy is a carefully chosen sentence, delivered at exactly the right moment, designed to bypass your logic entirely. There is a pervasive assumption that manipulation only happens to other people, in other countries, under authoritarian regimes. Educated professionals often believe their intellect provides a natural shield against manufactured narratives. Cognitive psychology reveals a very uncomfortable truth. Higher intelligence does not protect you. In many cases, it makes you more susceptible. Smart people are simply better at building complex, rational justifications for conclusions they have already arrived at emotionally. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman mapped this vulnerability. He demonstrated that the human brain operates on two distinct tracks. System 1 is fast, intuitive, and highly emotional. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and analytical. Propaganda targets System 1. It operates across democracies and dictatorships alike because it does not rely on a specific political structure. It exploits universal human biological hardware. Look at this cross-section of the human brain. When a perceived threat is introduced, the amygdala activates within milliseconds. It floods the body with stress hormones, triggering an immediate fight or flight response. In this heightened state of fear, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational analysis and long-term planning, is functionally suppressed. The brain prioritizes immediate survival, actively disabling its own capacity to ask if a claim is actually true. A secondary exploit relies on repetition. Psychologists call it the illusory truth effect. When people are exposed to a specific claim repeatedly, they begin to rate that statement as true, even if they initially knew it was false. In our evolutionary past, familiar things were usually things we had experienced and survived. The brain interprets familiarity as a signal of safety and truth. Encountering the same lie hundreds of times manipulates this specific neurological pathway. An effective manipulation campaign does not need to win a logical debate. It only requires triggering these specific biological overrides to neutralize critical thought before it can even begin. Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, recognized how easily these biological levers could be pulled. He applied his uncle's psychoanalytic theories to the public sphere, inventing the modern public relations industry in the process. In his 1928 writing, Bernays argued that the masses were driven by irrational, unconscious desires. He believed an enlightened elite needed to guide this public through what he termed the engineering of consent. The most lethal application of his methods occurred in 1954. The United Fruit Company, facing threats to its massive landholdings from Guatemala's democratically elected president, Jacobo Arbenz, hired Bernays to protect their assets. Bernays deployed the us versus them cognitive bias. He orchestrated a massive media campaign that reframed Arbenz, a moderate land reformer, as a dangerous communist menace positioned in America's backyard, triggering deep Cold War anxieties. The Eisenhower administration, primed by this manufactured panic, authorized a CIA coup. A sovereign democracy was dismantled, and hundreds of thousands of civilians died in the ensuing decades, all initiated by a public relations campaign exploiting tribal heuristics. Authoritarian regimes rely on state broadcasters to enforce narratives. In a free society without a centralized censor, the coordination of mass manipulation requires a different architecture entirely. Linguist Noam Chomsky and economist Edward Herman mapped this architecture in 1988. They introduced the propaganda model to explain how aligned incentives replace central coordination. This diagram illustrates their model. Information in a democracy passes through structural filters. Dominant corporate ownership dictates broad priorities. Reliance on advertising demands advertiser approval. And dependency on official government or corporate sources restricts what journalists can safely publish without losing access. These layers of friction naturally define the Overton window, the narrow band of discourse considered mainstream and acceptable. Policies and ideas falling outside this bracket are not debated. They are dismissed as extremist, naive, or completely ignored. The system disciplines itself. A media ecosystem heavily reliant on corporate capital and official access manufactures consensus smoothly. It bypasses the need to explicitly silence dissent by structurally and economically marginalizing it from the start. Propagandists frequently eliminate the time available for analytical thought. By creating an immediate crisis and demanding an instant response, They prevent the public from engaging their slow, deliberate System 2 reasoning. The events of August 1964 provide a precise example of this manufactured urgency. President Lyndon Johnson addressed the American public, claiming U.S. naval vessels had faced an unprovoked attack in the Gulf of Tonkin. Declassified documents later confirmed the intelligence on the scene was deeply ambiguous. Radar contacts were likely weather phenomena, and sonar pings were nervous operators. The second attack, the one that triggered the escalation, did not happen. Yet the administration presented the threat as absolute and immediate. The rapid demand for a congressional resolution gave lawmakers and the press 72 hours to decide, forcing them to default to executive authority rather than conducting a thorough evidentiary review. Over 58,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese perished in the ensuing conflict. The escalation was secured by deliberately compressing the timeline, preventing the analytical scrutiny of a phantom attack. 4 decades later, institutional conformity drove a similarly catastrophic outcome. The lead-up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq demonstrates how the bandwagon effect can capture an entire media apparatus. In February 2003, Secretary of State Colin Powell delivered a 76-minute presentation to the United Nations. The highly produced, authoritative framing of satellite photos and intercepted audio completely overrode the deeply uncertain intelligence from defense agencies regarding weapons of mass destruction. Major press outlets abandoned their role as an adversarial check. They amplified the administration's claims directly to the public. Journalists who questioned the intelligence were largely ignored, sidelined, or mocked for deviating from the established narrative. This uniformity created the impression of an overwhelming consensus. Humans are wired to follow the crowd, because for most of our history, social isolation meant death. When every network implies unanimity, the brain complies to avoid the psychological pain of rejection. The most destructive geopolitical deception of the 21st century did not require a totalitarian censor. It succeeded because major institutions simply found it safer to conform to the prevailing winds than to challenge executive power. We are currently living through a structural evolution in how information is filtered. Social media platforms have replaced human editors with automated engagement algorithms. These algorithms do not possess inherent ideological goals. They are built to optimize a single metric, time spent on the platform. And they quickly discovered that maximizing engagement maps directly onto our System 1 biological triggers. Content that induces outrage, fear, and tribal hostility naturally keeps users scrolling longer than nuanced, data-driven analysis. The architecture of the modern internet is essentially an automated system for mass amygdala hijacking. This personalization creates what researchers call the filter bubble. It functions as an individualized Overton window, surrounding you with data that confirms your pre-existing beliefs, while systematically erasing contradictory evidence from your feed. The digital age didn't invent new methods of persuasion. It simply industrialized our neurobiological vulnerabilities, constructing a bespoke, airtight reality tunnel for every citizen. There is no complete protection against these structural cognitive exploits. Your vulnerabilities are features of your human biology. However, clinical research shows there are empirically proven methods to meaningfully reduce your susceptibility. Psychologists use a framework called inoculation theory. Exposing your brain to the mechanics of manipulation before you encounter it in the wild functions like a vaccine, building cognitive antibodies that help you recognize the tactics in real time. One specific protocol is the SIFT method. Stop before reacting, investigate the source, find better coverage, trace claims to their origin. These steps insert a deliberate pause, forcing your brain out of its fast emotional System 1 processing and re-engaging your analytical System 2. This friction is crucial. The exact moment you feel righteously certain or absolutely outraged by a piece of information is the exact moment you must slow down and apply the most rigorous scrutiny. The architect of a manipulation campaign achieves their greatest victory the moment they convince you that you are uniquely immune to their tactics. True epistemic defense does not come from cynicism. It requires the humble, continuous interrogation of your own certainties.